Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Clause YouTube channel Strategic Frontlines. Today we have with us Air Marshal Dr. Diptendu Choudhury, PVSM, AVSM, VSM retired. He is a strategic expert and the author of the book Indian Air Power, Contemporary and Future Dynamics. I welcome you to the show, Air Marshal Choudhury.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roshan. It's a privilege to be back on air with Clause. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, and it's really a privilege to have you with us. And today what we'll do is we'll discuss Chinese PLA Air Force as also China-Pak cooperation in the air domain and what are the implications of that. So firstly, Air Marshal Choudhury, the modernization process which has taken place as far as Air Force is concerned in China is very fast. Firstly, they are transitioning to a fleet which is dominated by fourth generation, fifth generation fighters, whether it is J-10 or J-20, and they are also trying to, get in sixth generation, that is J-35A stealth fighters. Secondly, they are also progressing steadily as far as engines are concerned. Their indigenous engines, whether it is WS-10, WS-15, they're trying to replace the Russian ones. And it is believed that the average quality, survivability, and technical sophistication have increased, as also the production rate is also quite good. So my first question is, what are the general trends you see in the Chinese Air Force, especially in terms of fighter jets, engines, and especially the doctrinal reforms? Have they been successful? Similarly, the joint operations and the digital integration for complex multi-theater scenarios, how effective are they? So your initial remarks and all these questions.
Dr. Roshan, the PLAF is an amazing story of development and growth. And the PLA Air Force, it's an old Air Force. We will discuss the little bit of the background a little later. Because that is where the origins of the PLF and their thinking of the use of air power is very important. But, it underwent a sea change, a rapid transformation. Actually, the real tipping point was the first Gulf War. And the Chinese, the PLA, monitored and examined and studied that war very, very, very closely. And they were the most important thing they took away from it was the Western employment of air power and use of space for employment of air power and the kind of effects it created in the Gulf War. So they were very impressed with that. And that is where the real transformation began for the Chinese Air Force. And today, where they have reached, in fact, about 5-6 years ago, the USAF chief has gone on record in the congressional hearing and said that the rate at which the PLAF is growing would outnumber the US Air Force by 2035. And that's not very far away. And that is something which is really concerning the US military, because you will appreciate the U.S. military's presence in Taiwan support and in the Indo-Pacific region, and especially in the South and South China and East China Seas in the earlier days, was an important threat, which China considered the highest possible threat to its mainland, and it has systematically worked to overcome the US dominance in the waters. We will discuss that along the way. But for this development, China, you will remember, had a reputation of being the largest possible air force in the world with the largest number of platforms. It had a huge inventory, a dated but a legacy inventory. And in fact, the earlier days, from Mao's days when the PLA was first formed, the thought was that numbers itself was considered a deterrence for the Chinese Air Force. But that has changed over time. And today, the PLAF looks at air power in a much more holistic manner, just like the West does. And it plays a very vital role in its not only defense of its mainland, but in also in defending its maritime domain and neutralizing or countering at least the US threat. So, for which it had the first most important thing it did was focusing transition from a legacy to a modern platforms. It has cut down on numbers. It has reduced the size of its air force over the years. But uh, in this process, in the initial years, you will appreciate it didn't have enough technology. So in the initial days, there was a lot of, if I may put it in a not so subtle manner, pilfering of technology. There was a whole lot of industrial espionage and reverse engineering, which the Chinese resorted to bring their technology up. So they concentrated on transformation into a newer technology, creating enough technological capacity by research and development. It waited to create indigenous resilience in its internal industry and systematically reduce its foreign dependency. So that is where today China is. And now it has reached a stage where it is scaling up its production capability across in all platforms. So it has concentrated in a very holistic manner, right from platforms, radars, systems, advanced avionics, networking systems, space technology, space-based support systems, and integrating the entire thing into the construct of warfighting. Over to you, Roshan.
Yeah, you rightly pointed out 2035 is the timeline what they are looking for, and they have been very smart to adopt the new technologies. They have learned from US, and what you rightly pointed that there is a resilience. So as you said that they are modernizing. So if you can show certain light on their fighters, how the modernization trend is going on in that, and also what about the bombers? We know they have got new H-6N bombers and they have developed aerial refueling, long range cruise missiles. They also have nuclear armed air launched ballistic missile systems. So, if you can highlight a little bit on that, the stealth H-20 bombers, air refuelers, and the AVOX, if you can highlight about that, how that the kind of a modernization is taking place, and whether it can give a competition to US, or they are still very far off as far as the quality is concerned.
Okay, so you've given me a fairly wide canvas on this, Dr. Roshan. So what I will do is, it will be very simplistic if we just talk about platforms. Please understand platforms, and that is actually problem is whenever it comes to Air Force, everyone loves talking about platforms. When it comes to fighters and bombers, they're very very attractive, especially to the younger generation. But you have to understand these are not just toys for boys. These are serious military equipment which has enormous capability. So let's talk about from a capability development, and then we will bring in where do these fighters and transports and all these capabilities fit in, because that is what the PLA Air Force is for. It's a strategic air force today. So I must take us back a little bit quickly to the past. The last war it had seriously fought was in Korea. So in those days it was largely a legacy air force and large numbers which I mentioned earlier. But after the Vietnam War, that is the last time the PLAF was activated. It flew cap missions, but it didn't really engage in combat. So last combat it has seen was the Korean War. But in the later years, and when especially when Deng Xiaoping came, he assessed that future wars would be local and limited, and air dominance would be a critical necessity. So he is the one who initiated the spending on the Air Force. And he actually was instrumental in downsizing the legacy Air Force, and it actually reduced to almost by one third of its size by early 1990s. And so he also said that we need to look at more air defense in a more holistic manner, because they perceive the US threat to the mainland, and especially in its Taiwan contingency. So the US air power, do remember, they have seen the outcomes of US air power in the end of World War II, and also the initial war when the nationalists fought the Chinese communist forces, and that's when the US was helping the Chinese nationalist forces. So thing was very clear. So because of this higher leadership push, the PLA was able to transform, and it didn't transform just blindly. They came out with a series of white defense papers for all military transformation. They're available online, and I have done in my research, when I had gone through them on each of them, it's fascinating. Every white paper, and they have come out every 4 or 5 years in some kind of a relative periodicity. But every white paper was a modest goal and what they wanted to achieve, and they systematically achieved it. So air power was built up in a very systematic, planned manner in over the years through the white papers. And in fact, actually, if you read the white papers, you will see the transformation in terms of what are they seeking air power to do for their nation from a national security and national interest perspective. It's fascinating read. And so when the Chinese Communist Party recognized the importance of air power in war fighting, they gave an enormous amount of push. And it is actually there was a blessings of this chairman called Jiang Zemin in 1999,
Yes.
when he gave PLAF the sort of a go-ahead for service-specific strategic concept, which was developed by 2004. So by 2004, the Chinese had a clear goal to become a strategic air force, and that is how they looked at it. And in fact, which integrates air and space and is simultaneously prepared for offensive and defensive outlook. This is interesting because if you remember, which I mentioned earlier, the earlier years, the China's outlook was totally defensive. Air Force was defense of the mainland. Here were the first beginnings of going out. So now, when you wanted to go out and increase your offensive capability, mind you, they are doing it against the U.S. The maritime, the carrier fleets, which will position themselves in the East and South China Sea earlier. That is how they had perceived it. So they wanted to systematically threaten and push this US threat further and further away from the mainland. So you have the first island chain, which includes all Japan and all these islands. And then you have the second island chain, which goes all the way to Guam. So as of now, they have successfully been able to strategically transform the Air Force that it is a serious threat to the US, and the US does not have a free run in the first island chain anymore. So this is something which they have done systematically. And what is very fascinating is that they have brought in air power into the maritime domain.
Yes.
So now look at it, how they have changed the whole structure. Now we talked about aircraft. Earlier they had the older platforms, J7, J8. And over the years, in fact, if you look at it from a larger perspective, by 2010, I think I told you 2004 is the time they looked at from a strategic outlook. By 2007, their Air Force, the third generation platforms, the older platforms, had reduced drastically to about 25 odd percent, 25%, the composition. By 2007, they had already built up 60% of the Air Force was fourth generation.
Yes.
And about 15% was fifth generation.
Yes.
Today, at 2025, they are almost, I will say, 60% fourth generation. They have still some third generation left over, possibly, but and a growing percentage of fifth generation.
Yes.
So fourth and fifth generation are their mainstays, and the sixth generation has already made its appearance.
Yes.
So you will see in the coming years, third generation would have gone. Fourth generation fighters numbers will start shrinking. Fifth generation will increase, and you will have a small percentage of sixth generation fighters is what they are looking at in the larger context. Now, what is the context of these modern fighters? Okay, see, today they're already the mainstay of the Air Force are the J-10s, which is about 600 odd of them. The Sukhois, which they had about 200 odd plus, they have done away with the older Sukhoi and they're now with the Su-30 MKK and the Su-35 versions, their own versions of the J-16 and the J-20s. Uh, the J-20s are also fairly large in number, about 230 odd plus. So the point I'm trying to make is that these aircraft with stealth and long range capability, with better EW capabilities, are designed fundamentally to defeat the US air power in the maritime domain.
Yes.
So they want to defeat the US carrier group. So that is why they want stealth, so that they can penetrate their carrier group defenses and carry out long range strike with long range weapons. That is why so much of emphasis on long range weapons.
Yes.
And additionally, along with that, from the early days in the last 10 or last 2 decades itself, today we have reached where they have already about 25 tankers. They have about 50 odd AEWC aircraft of different vintage, but they're modernizing them rapidly. So what are they looking at? They are looking at space support linked through the aerial support platforms, data linked with the fighters, integrated into their anti-area access denial
Nice.
network. So the PLAF looks at the vertical domain. Now, very interestingly, you would have known that 2024, last year, the plan, the Navy, which had its own fighters, bombers, radars, own air bases, they have handed them all over to the PLAF. Look at the change in their outlook. They are concentrating only on their carrier group and the naval aviation to support support the plan. So the Air Force mission has widened into the maritime domain, the vertical part of the maritime domain. Now that is a systematic strategy which the two chiefs were responsible for. One Zhu Kiliang, which is about the third or fourth chief before this, and the one chief after that called Mao Zedong. These two gentlemen actually had become Zhu Kiliang was in the CMC as a vice chairman. He was the first PLF officer to have reached that rank. So he was there and able to make the PLA understand the importance of air power and allowed expansion of air power. So this is as far the fighters are concerned. Then comes the radars and the air defense. Systematically, all the coastal defense, air defense has gone over to the Air Force. They had created these islands, if you remember, in the South China Sea, well out into the
Yes.
South China Sea, hundreds of kilometers away. Why is
Yes.
that? Those bases, 3 of them are fighter capable. They have airfields. They can each hold about 100 odd aircraft, mix of radars and SAM systems. They are actually islands, static aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. So they are like the outer layer. They extend the PLF and the PLA and the PLAN's reach further outwards. Look at the strategy. They have
Yes.
enhanced and got now strategic depth in this place. So the PLAF is now, its mission is looking after the entire vertical domain over the maritime airspaces. So we'll come back to that a little later.
Yes.
We'll talk about the bombers. It had the old fleet of H-6 bombers, which it rapidly modernized to the H-6Ks with modern technology, glass cockpit, a whole lot of avionics, advanced avionics capable of carrying long-range air launch cruise missiles, and H-6Ns, which were capable of launching nuclear weapons.
Yes.
But the H-6Ks, very interesting. They slapped on long-range cruise missiles flew it regularly to Guam, which was a US bomber base. It was a US bomber base for 16 years.
Yeah.
They have been flying this regularly, and then obviously this posed a threat to the Guam Air Base and its bomber presence. The US moved its bomber fleet back to mainland, and now they come there on rotation, but they're not permanently based there. So look at the strategic role the PLAF has played in pushing the US further and further away. Now let's look at one more aspect. Now that we are on this, we're talking about the South China and East China Sea. Taiwan is important mission. It used to fly periodically. A few fighters, they used to sort of breach the Taiwanese airspace in the earlier days, in the earlier 2000s. If you remember about 2007 or so, I think they had, or maybe 14, I forget the exact date, when they had declared, 14, if I remember correctly, when they had declared ADIZ in the East China Sea. So that was an intent of the Chinese, but they really couldn't have enforced. The PLAF wasn't capable of enforcing the because ADIZ has to be enforced with fighter and regular presence to enforce that you own the airspace, but they couldn't do that. Today, they have not only they are violating Taiwan's airspace regularly, they are doing it in large operational mission packages, which comprises of fighters, bombers, escort platforms, EW platforms, refuelers, jammers, and they violate Taiwanese airspace with such impunity that you must, all of us, I mean, I think most lot of our audience must be aware that the strait between Taiwan and China, in the center of it is the median line, which
Yes,
which designated the different airspaces and of China, mainland China, and Taiwan.
Yeah.
They have been violating it with such regularity that it has lost its salience. It is practically of no consequence. But why are they doing that? 3 quick points. A, when you keep doing this, it puts the Taiwanese air defense and its military under tremendous pressure. Because now they're churning, the radars are churning, the fighters are standing by, they're actually bleeding out and tiring out the Taiwanese military. That is one long-term gain. Second thing is, when you keep carrying out this mission, and when you actually carry out a mission, you will not know when it is coming because it's become such a regular feature. The third important aspect is the present capability will, in the future, allow China to enforce ADIZs not only in the East China Sea, possibly in the South China Sea, and that could seriously affect the entire Asia, in fact, and the larger Indo-Pacific construct. So, if you look at it, this is how the larger strategic goals of China drove the transformation of its air force and elevation it into a strategic air force.
I fully agree. There are so many points which you brought about, and especially you rightly pointed out first that the white paper, if you analyze them, that is a window which tells them how systematically they have done the transformation. You rightly pointed out the thing that Air Force has moved from a defensive to a more offensive platform. And that is because they are using it for the maritime domain. And the Taiwan thing, what you said, is really very correct, because they have been regularly and with punitively, they have been crossing the, the median line. Very rightly pointed out. But I would like to now take you to another aspect of this, which will give it more impetus as far as the Air Force is concerned, and that is the unmanned system and the electronic warfare. Because we know that they have, China is one of the countries which produces one of the largest number of drones. They have high altitude WZ-7 drones, medium altitude drones, then the stealthy strike capable UAVs. We also know that they have a lot of swarms. So my question is, are they able to have what now a lot of people talk about, the man-unmanned teaming concepts? Have they been able to operationalize it? And the role of these unmanned vehicles in the Air Force?
So unmanned vehicles actually, they are what should I say, the fashion of the day. So everyone is talking about unmanned, but unmanned vehicles have been there for the longest time. And the salience of unmanned platforms affecting surface operations in a major way was what is the first thing which came out in the Ukraine war. And also with it came the long range, long distance warfare, missiles, long range missiles and capabilities came up. But China has been focusing on the unmanned for the longest period of time. If you look back, look at the China's areas of focus and development. It focused on cyber, it focused on space, it focused on unmanned capabilities, unmanned systems. All the areas where, especially space and cyber, where they found that is a place they could take an asymmetric advantage over the US military. US military was a behemoth. It was too huge and too big, even now it is, for China to sort of out militarize and outnumber it. So first it focused on developing certain capabilities. So one was cyber. It looked at alternative ways of war fighting. There's all this informationalization, intelligentization of warfare. What was it? It was networking its systems, it was weapons, it was trying to fight smart. Okay. But the biggest advantage was that the PLA, or I would say the PRC, the People's Republic of China, had a larger strategic outlook, a grand strategy. It says that it would not get entangled in a war as far as it could. Okay. So it stayed clear of war fighting for the period which allowed it the strategic space to develop its military. It carried out a little bit of skirmishes, keeping its finger in, so that it would its presence, and it was also testing waters, testing capabilities, testing the adversaries and their own capabilities. So they did it in a very systematic manner, but they always kept it below the threshold of any serious conflict, because that was a strategic goal. When he said Deng's famous stating that tread softly, feel the stones and then cross the river. Why? It was building its capabilities while it was testing the waters outside. With Xi Jinping, this transformation came in when they felt that now they could open up a little more. Maybe he has overreached a bit. That is my personal point of view, because the Chinese military is still yet some time away
Yes.
before it can become a real serious threat to the US. It is a threat, but a serious threat is still some time away. So it brought itself enough time to do this. So amongst the other areas which it focused on was unmanned platforms, both to meet commercial requirements, because if you see, they're already using drones for delivery and extensively. And if you see Chinese, cities, some of the way they are today, the advancement and the use of drones is extensive, and they're using drone unmanned platforms, which are as cargo platforms. But from a military perspective, drones and long-range drones were vital to fill their ISR and EW gaps. They were a cheaper way to fill the gaps till they developed the most serious platforms. They were also a huge boost to their long-range airborne strike capability. Mind you, the PLAAF, the Air Force's offensive capability, is still under development. It's still inadequate, way far from its needs. So it has compensated already for it by using extensively drones.
Yes.
But you look at the platforms, they are coming with more and more specialist weapons. So they had taken a decision long back, obviously, that they would be using a force structure which would both. So advances in their manned unmanned teaming most certainly will be way ahead of where we are probably at this point in time, because we started late on the game. They haven't really exhibited those capabilities publicly, but most certainly there are a lot of reports and people, analysis and a lot of speculation on it, putting intelligence inputs together. So they form a very important part of the PLAF's overall network and overall force structure and inventory. You will also see there's a huge amount of focus on support platforms, EW platforms, ISR platforms, because do understand at the end of the day, China has a huge territory and a huge border to monitor.
Yes.
So it needs those numbers in a huge manner.
Yeah.
Thankfully for us, a huge focus of that presently is towards Taiwan and less focus towards India. So we can discuss that a little more when we discuss the threat towards India.
Yes.
But
Yes.
China's progress has been in a very holistic manner, and I'll hand it to them that they've been able to run with many horses in the race.
You really pointed out a lot of things, and the plethora of issues what we have discussed, and the holistically how Air Force is developing as far as China is concerned. This brings me back to PLAAF's. What is its role in our area near the Tibet area? So can you highlight certain areas, how it is going to work there, and how are we going to? How are we prepared for that?
Okay, the salience of Tibet, the northern areas, the northeast, I don't need to go into that. I think that is amply clear. So we will move ahead from that. What was missing in Tibet for the longest period of time when China's and the PLAF's, both the PLA and the PLAF's focus was on Taiwan. And it's still there on the Taiwan. So for almost till Doklam happened, China's focus on Tibet was on a low key. It was building up infrastructure, but at a relatively low pace. Airfield infrastructure was still nascent, but they would come on periodic deployments on exercises in the good weather months, not in the winter months. And they would come with possibly older platforms, stay there for a month or so, fly, carrying out navigation missions, orientation missions, radar calibration missions, and some missions close to our border possibly. But in the recent past, post Doklam, they have accelerated their development in TAR in a huge manner. A larger number of bases, they are strengthening the infrastructure, they're building airfields right across the borders. Possibly they are looking at building air bases at a lower altitudes, because all their air bases are deep inside and at higher altitudes, which has enormous penalties for them. And basing them permanently is a huge challenge even as of now. So the PLA presence in TAR was limited. Its offensive capability was limited, and it had a modicum of air defense capability, which it has sought to build up rapidly after Doklam. What worried them in Doklam is the scale and the pace at which the Indian Air Force built up. We deployed all the squadrons, out there, transport aircraft, moved all our troops in large numbers to the huge number of logistics missions were flown in support of the army, ISR, a lot of stuff went up. And they realized in terms of the IAF offensive capability in Tibet was enormous. And so the Indian Air Force actually was an asymmetric advantage in the favor of the Indian military and especially the Indian Army against the PLA in Tibet. So it has learned this lesson, but its capabilities still do not allow it to build on both sides equally. So it is still keeping Tibet in low burner, while it is again buying strategic time to build its capabilities as quickly as it can. So it has focused on its offensive capabilities and air defense capabilities on the Taiwan Strait. But you will appreciate if the Taiwan issue goes away, all those assets are available. And over a period of time, they will build up their capacity so that they can possibly deal with both the contingencies. Okay, it must, while India is not considered such a major threat to them as of now still, but they understand that India is a long-term challenge for them. So they are building their capabilities accordingly. But presently, because as I mentioned, the offensive capability of the PLAAF being low in Tibet, it has compensated for it by its rocket force.
Yes.
Okay, so there are changes which are taking place there, and there are changes in reorganization. Notice while we talked about the theater commands of the PLA for the longest period of time, they have adapted their structures. They have already kept changing their theater command construct periodically. The reason why I'm bringing this out, that they have understood one fact, that future war fighting, you need flatter organizations which can operate in a very, what should I say, decentralized manner and respond rapidly, the most importantly.
Yes.
Okay. And in a multi-domain environment, bringing all the services together for the best possible military options and solutions for that specific context. So this is something we need to be worried about, because the way China is developing its capabilities, it wants to strengthen its air power capabilities in that domain. When it strengthens its air power capability, brings in the collusivity with the PA, the Pakistan Air Force, with whom it has been training for the longest period of time.
Yeah, my next question.
Okay, we'll come to that later. So
Yes.
I'll just end with one aspect here, that even now the Indian Air Force, despite its reduced numbers, has an asymmetric advantage. But now we are plateauing out on those numbers, and we'll be struggling with these numbers for the next 10 years. What will happen in this 10 years? By 10 years, fifth generation will be the mainstay of the PLAF. Sixth generation would have come into its inventory. Sixth generation would be present in Tibet, most certainly. And Pakistan would be already having fifth generation fighters. So we are, while our capability still, I'm sure we'll build up our capability for some time, but the capacity in terms of numbers is something we'll be struggling with over the next 10 years.
Yes. You rightly talked about the capacity what India needs to build up in the next 10 years. But and the threat will be both Pakistan and China. So I want to ask you, as far as Pakistan is concerned, apart from the joint exercises, what they do with the Chinese, what are the technology transfers which are happening as far as Pakistan is concerned? What is the interoperability efforts which is taking place? How is it helping Pakistan to enhance tactical and operational capabilities? There was news that J-35 was to be given to Pakistan. So how are they doing in that field? And also we find that as far as during the Op Sindhu, we found that China provided them with a lot of help, whether it was real-time satellite imagery, precision positioning and targeting data, as also advised on the radar integration. They have been using HQ9 ADS systems, Baidu satellite navigation. So in future, what do you feel we need to do? Because China and Pakistan will act as one.
It's very interesting you bring this out, Dr. Roshan, because this is something I wrote about, I think 4 or 5 years ago, about this collusion and its significances. There were enormous amount of inputs to us. The number of visits made by the the Pakistan Air Chief to China, the visit of this gentleman, General Zhu Qilang, who was the vice chairman of the CMC. He visited Pakistan in 2019, if I'm not wrong. And it actually, he prevailed on the Chinese, leader, met the political leadership and the military leadership of Pakistan, and has actually convinced them that they need to focus on the air power and let the PF play a major role in any contingency, play the lead role. And they have been, because for the last 2014 onwards, there's the time I mentioned when they took the decision, that they need to change their outlook. They have been exercising, I beg your pardon, extensively with the Pakistani Air Force. Now, earlier days, they were just, fly together. But what has this exercise, the famous exercise Shaheen, which they've been carrying out, and I think they've gone through about, they've hit exercise Shaheen 11 as well. And the last one was held in 2023. Now, what were these exercises all about? Now, we are already aware that Pakistan Aircraft Complex at Kamra, PSC Kamra, is its aeronautical complex, and it's been producing the airframe for the J-17. It also produces the trainers. So the other avionics and the engines and all that come from China, and the outer airframe produced in Pakistan. So they assembled this. So it's a joint production.
Yes.
So this joint production has opened the window for the PAF into Chinese technology. Now understand why did it do so? Because when the Pressler Amendment came in, and I think 2008 or so, when the restrictions came in on the F-16, that's when PF realized that the US could not be relied on for its technological advance and keeping its PAF modernized. Because that is one, for some strange reason, and that is why I wonder why people in our country don't understand air power anyway. But in Pakistan, the focus on their air power has been very steady and systematic. So the Pakistan aeronautical complex or their indigenous industry, aviation industry, gained enormously from China, from the PLAF. So while PLAF provided them platforms, avionics, assisted them in technology, networks, weapons, radars, what did the PF have to offer the Chinese? They had to offer the expertise and exposure which the PF had, having trained with the Western Air Forces for the longest period of time. The PAF flies Western tactics for the longest period of time. They have an enormous amount of participation in exercises abroad, the PF. So it has lots to gain from Pakistan. Mind you, Pakistan had stayed in combat, readiness for the longest time. After Kargil, in fact, right through the Soviet days, it had stayed in active air operations. The PF was operating and flown some enormous amount of sorties against the Soviets. Thereafter, it took part in the US global war on terror, and it took part in air operations in the FATA region. So its air force has stayed in combat touch for the longest time. China hadn't fought since Korea. So there was enormous amount of lessons it could learn from the PF. And the last and the most important thing, it opened the window. The PLF got a window into the Indian Air Force's tactics and concepts of operations. So it was a win-win from both sides. So I'm not surprised what happened in Sindoor. We knew there were enough intelligence inputs. But this spin which came in was more of to market the Chinese military industry, because it would have been an enormous dividend to the Chinese platforms if what they had, the narrative they had put out had been proven correct. But now that has also fallen through. And it is pretty clear that, yes, the technology, the China's achieved those technology, but the fact that which has come out in our television, the large number of PL-15 missiles that we have picked up,
yes,
were defeated. Mind you, they were defeated, and somewhere probably missile failures as well. So it tells you a lot that it is still work in progress. But they, rest assured, China and Pakistan have followed and probably dissected Operation Sindoor, to to the tiniest of pieces, and they will fill those gaps in capabilities and develop these along the way. The advantage Pakistan today, because of this joint production, is that it has now become almost a partner with the Chinese aviation industry, which gives them a huge access to military aviation industry of China, and that is going to be a serious threat to us. Certainly, J-35 has already been, the talk is on that they will probably get the J-35s. With that will come longer range missiles, weapon systems. The radars and air defense systems have not proven very successful. Rest assured,
Yes.
those are the areas they will focus on. So there will be enormous amount of growing, engagement between the two air forces on their role against India. I'm sure at some point people would be curious to know, this two front and that contingency. I will put it this way, that look at it. When when India and Pakistan fought, there was enormous support from China. Whether China will get into active combat with us, my reading is unlikely, but they will provide active support, because China will not get into only engagements or conflicts on its term of its choice. But on the other hand, if China goes to war with India, then we have a serious problem in hand, because Pakistan would love to jump in. And Pakistan would love to pay back in kind all that we did to it in Sindoor. So that is a serious future threat.
No, I understand what you rightly pointed out about the symbiotic relationship between the two countries, and the lessons which China has learned from the Pakistan. You very rightly pointed out, and also the failures of Chinese weaponry, which was quite clear, whether it was the PL-15 or the HQ-9. They will be analyzing all those things. We have discussed a lot of things, but there are a lot of questions also. So if you permit, I'll take a few questions.
Absolutely. You can take probably a couple of them together, so then it'll be easier to.
Yeah. This is by Mr. Akash Sadani. He says, Chinese appear to have 6th generation fighters and numbers. On the other hand, we have an expanded AD grid with wide spectrum radars able to pick off stealth fighters at will. Your views?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last bit. Sorry.
I'll repeat the question. He says, Chinese appear to have 6th generation fighters and they have enough numbers. On the other hand, we have an expanded AD grid with wide spectrum radars able to pick off stealth fighters. Your views?
So this is a cat and mouse game. Right now, what we did and what we will be able to do in the future will change. Right now, what Pakistan or China did or could do will change. So while it has 6th generation in fighters already, its numbers are still a long way off. And like I said, these numbers, please understand, the main focus and threat will remain Taiwan. So it will put as best platforms against the Taiwanese. It needs the stealth and penetration capabilities and long-range standoff capabilities mixed with unmanned capabilities to take out the American threat at long distances. Now, from a similar perspective, our extended integrated air defense has proven very robust. But I would say the Chinese strike capability is still a long way off. And as of now, I think our air defense capability still will prevail for some more time. But most certainly, we cannot limit it to air defense anymore, where we look at only up to the near space. We need to look at up to the Kármán line, because the near space will be used by low orbit satellites, will be used by ballistic missiles and long range weapons to transit through near space. So we need to enhance our air domain awareness to aerospace domain awareness, and our air defense has to expand to aerospace defense. So I think this is something our industry is already seized of. There is a work on in direct direction, but this will, I think, like I said, it's a cat and mouse game.
Another question is by Ricky Malhotra, who says, no doubt the development of weapons is crucial, but is the location from where you launch these systems equally important factor in today's battle scenario?
Most certainly. I mean, if you because today the visibility of the battlefield is such that uh, change detection, that means any changes from the last satellite visit to now is something looked at very there are AI assisted change detection, so it tells you exactly that okay, this is the platform, this is it at the rate of this moment, where will it be? Because if you keep a system static it most certainly will be targeted. Then you have the challenge of hardening it, strengthening it, and that itself becomes a huge aspect. Which, if you see, a lot of targets, a lot of sites of the Chinese Air Force in Tibet are huge shelters. They're concrete shelters. They have had to build it because you can't leave those assets in the open. So that is why, whereas in the tactical battle spaces, mobile systems will be more critical because they are able to shoot and scoot. So whether they're air defense or offensive weapons against long-range missiles, they will be much more mobile, and they will need to be mobile for the survival. But you will also appreciate that mobile systems have a limitation in their capability of the kind of weapons it can fire. So it's a trade-off, so you will have a mix of both. But I think the future will be in mobility, in reducing the sizes and the agility, and how you can employ these weapons and how smart they are to be able to penetrate adversarial defense systems.
There's another question by Srinivas. He says that with just airstrikes, how can China capture Taiwan? Don't they have to do an amphibious operation to capture Taiwan? Your views?
Okay, this is a wonderful question because this brings in the real essence of it. And this is the misunderstanding I think a lot of Indian viewers, strategic thinkers view when we talk about air power. We think that air power is only to fight the adversary's air force. No. Air power not only fights the adversary's air force, it carries out huge amount of offensive capability against the surface, the enemy army, and possibly the navy. But most certainly all the military aspects will be military target systems, whether they are counter force or counter value, will be struck by air power as well, apart from missiles as well. But what are they doing? They are firstly neutralizing Taiwanese air force so that there is no opposition to their amphibious operations. They will neutralize their air defense and their offensive capability and their defensive capabilities, so that when the offensive operations take place, it'll be a free run. This is what they call shaping the battle spaces. This is exactly what, in a different manner, what Israel did over Gaza. It pounded Gaza because it knew if the army were to move into urban Gaza and street to street fighting, it would take enormous losses. So it pounded Gaza, made it practically very difficult for the populace, for buildings, for the Hamas to sort of operate openly, and shape the environment for the Israeli Defense Forces, the army, to move in. So this is what it will be in Taiwan, the scenario. Okay.
One last question. It is, do you think that India needs long-range aircrafts? Do we need long-range bombers, you think? And also, I would like to ask you to conclude by what are your recommendations as to what we need to do?
Okay, quickly, I'll cover it. I think we've taken up a fair amount of time. So I'll put it this way. Indian Air Force understood the need for bombers for the longest period of time. Understand that earlier days, when post-independence, we still had British leadership in all our military arms, Army, Air Force, Navy. The British strategic thinking did not want wanted Indian Air Force to remain tactical. In fact, there was J.D. Blackett, who formed the Blackett Committee, who was actually a scientist but who played an enormous role in advising Nehru in what should India's military construct be. He advised Nehru that India does not need long-range bombers. India does not need bombers. India understood it. That is why it tried to revive the Liberator bombers, which were left behind uh, post independence, but we couldn't sustain them. So we got the a lighter bomber, the Canberra, which served a fantastic role till the 90s. We had the Canberras, which played an enormous role in all our operations. So it was a light bomber. But the challenge was we didn't have a long range bomber at this point in time. But that is also the time the light bomber came under, what should I say, competition from the multi-role long range strike aircraft, which fighters could do the same role in a more versatile manner. It could do air defense role as well play drop the same amount of weapons. So I'll put it to end the story short. Indian Air Force always believed in its bombers. It didn't have long range bombers. It contemplated leasing Russian bombers at one point in time, which was thought, and because the logistics of it was difficult. But long range bombers give you enormous strategic capability. Very interestingly, just having bombers raises the status of an air force when it sees in foreign amongst air forces are compared. But in our case, bombers would have a limitation because employment of bombers in the continental context, probably in the China threat, is something which is would have its huge challenges, but it would have an enormous role to play in the maritime domain. In terms of, so a small, probably half a squadron or maybe a squadron of bombers on a lease in the interim to fill the gap would not be a bad idea, but they're not easily available. That is a challenge today. What do we go for? And comes to the last question, that what would we need from a larger perspective? One is, of course, numbers. Numbers have their own language. But most important thing I would like to put across on this forum especially is the greatest need is a greater understanding the role air power will play in future joint operations, understanding why and how the Indian Air Force operates the way it does. Give Indian Air Force some credit. That is doctrine. Its inventory stood the time of the day of fighting a contemporary conflict and came out on top. It had its limitations. We have our huge challenges, but despite that, we were what should I say, prescient enough to get killer drones 10 years ago. We had long range weapons for the longest period of time. Our IACC has matured and our integrated air defense has become an extended air defense. We've been trying to get, and we finally got the S-400s over 10 years. So that is the kind of long-range thinking Indian Air Force has done. It is way ahead in its future warfighting thinking. I would love the Army and the Navy to come together and understand this and then figure out jointly how to employ air power, because I believe air power has lots to offer on the continental and the maritime domain and in a multi-domain construct of the future. But for needs for the future, obviously, we need to the 114 aircraft, the Tejas, Mark 1A in large numbers, the Mark 2 development, and the AMCA, the fifth generation fighter. All these aspects have to run parallelly and mature in an accelerated time frame. A greater production capability of platforms, more long range, most certainly maintain the BVR edge advantage. That means keep improving on your long range air to air missiles and long range air to surface missiles. Expand our air defense to aerospace defense. Expand networks so that our air defense is integrated holistically. Right now, a large amount of the air defense is on the strategic and the larger ends. We need to expand the lower end of the close-in air defense systems, because we've realized that in Sindoor, where Army did a fantastic role. But Army's capabilities and India's capabilities are a long way off to meet the tactical battle area requirements of the Army, let alone the whole nation. see the size and scale of India and of its borders. So the air defense requirements are enormous. We'll never be able to have a holistic 100% air defense. No nation in the world can. But we need to focus on key areas. So these are the few areas I would think we would need
Yes.
to integrate really and work together. Drones, the man-unmanned concepts, the force structuring of the Indian Air Force. There's a lot of work going on. We all talk about it. We think we are talking about it the first time, and trust us, our military is way ahead. They have thought about all this long time back, and they're already working on it.
I fully agree with you. We are in the journey and we are doing a lot of things.
Absolutely.
And not only in R&D, but the indigenization, the civil military fusion. There's so many things which are happening parallelly. And I'm sure all the people in the right places are thinking in the right direction. And we are building up our capabilities as well as the capacities. I would like to thank Air Marshal Choudhury for a very holistic analysis of China's Air Force, right from the journey, how it turned from its defensive to offensive capabilities, how it has developed that, how it is changing its posture and becoming more aggressive as far as Taiwan is concerned, how the collusivity is shaping. You have described all these things in a very nuanced way. I really want to thank you, and especially coming and sharing all your views. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Khanijo. It's been a pleasure to be with you and with Claus. And I also thank you and all those who have been probably hearing this live. Thank you for being so patient and hearing me through.
And I want to thank all our viewers for the lovely questions. So many questions we got today. Thank you so much.